Good morning. The Pearl Harbor celebration at the University of Arizona was yesterday, and since that's an interest to us, I'd like to have a talk about it. It was short and to the point. There was a podium. There were people all dressed up in their ROTC uniforms. Somebody gave a short speech, and they rang a bell that came from the battleship Arizona, and they read the names, about a handful of them, that were from the state of Arizona and were stationed on that ship. They lost their lives there. They've been doing that every year for the past several years when they took it over from the World War II guys. They only had about 3 rows of chairs, and I went and sat in the back so I could see everything. And this is when I get to stop and start to criticize. We'll criticize things before we start to butter them up. It's hopefully taken strictly as a compliment. There in front of me, a few rows down, was a female Air Force gal. She was dressed up like a man. She was acting like a man, smiling, confident, anything except womanly. She was at least a colonel because somebody walked up to her and saluted her, who was an officer himself. And that's the first criticism. She had no business being there. And she's literally one of the guys, gals that threw out the Air Force in Army whack and the Navy wave. She threw out everything Pearl Harbor was standing up for, just so she could be a professional consumer. She threw out God. She separated the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant. And she took the normal into the abnormal, that sort of stuff. She better not have had sex. She better not have had children. She threw all that out, and then they turned right around a few years later and insisted on reverse discrimination, and then they insisted on having children themselves. And it caused hell for everybody else. It caused a class of peasantry. In addition, there were only a handful of chairs there. There weren't any dignitaries to speak of that I could see. That Pearl Harbor and what it represents and the change, pulling together of our society, the very good part of our society, and how it ended up is terribly important for this country. There shouldn't have been a university professor or assistant professor or a graduate student that shouldn't have been sitting in the audience watching this, and there were none. You know the routine. We've seen them. They're so common now. They have this very immature-ish attitude, and they want to overthrow the United States and have a world government. They threw out the celibacy and poverty and kept the university professor tenure and that sort of thing. And they, too, even though you don't realize it, are on the same side as that female pilot, Air Force gal, and completely on the other side of Pearl Harbor. You can continue this. You can, just to sneak something in, later that day, I'm about a mile from the university, and I went to a store that was about a mile past that. And going there, I passed 3 people who were pushing shopping carts with their belongings inside, and a few other homeless. That's how prevalent it is around here. And that's the result of our female fighter pilot and those university professors. You never saw anything like that. And both those are the literal opposite of Pearl Harbor. You can change the scale. You can realize that Japan viewed themselves as a chosen race. Remember, England taught them how to build up industry, and they thought that Japan would just join the gang in the playground, and instead they became this ruthless dictatorial country. They all do that. That's just Mother Nature. And they were on the same side as the Germans, and they were on the same side as the Italians, and they were on the same side as the Russians. The communist countries view this stuff intentionally. They just take Catholic doctrine and take its mirror opposite. They hustle intentionally. And they were all on the same side until they started running into each other, just like gangs in a city. They start overrunning their turf. And nothing changes, even if you change the scale. And again, there's one side, and that's that female fighter pilot, the manly whatever she's called, and those university professors. Let's continue this just a little farther. Those young men and women, those guys and gals, the ROTC characters, are talented, and they have nothing to do with what I'm about to say, but they have a great deal of ability. Right down the end of the mall, there are groups that are the same age and college students, and they just crank up those groups, and they go around setting fires and rioting and sitting in the middle of the highway and those sorts of things. They're the ones who are violent, and they're the ones we need somebody to stand up to. This was a big thing for my day. If you went, you felt like you were running away to the military and the police. There was a ceiling above you. I've literally apologized for people for not going to Washington, D.C. and forming a French underground and starting to stand up to the civil rights movement. There are lots of people who are a lot more talented than I'll ever be who would do just that. And again, that's the side of the Pearl Harbor sires. Let's keep this up. There was a gentleman that gave a short speech, and he was talking about interviewing one of the last survivors that was on that ship. And he was describing how the last survivor didn't want to talk about it because it was just so hellacious. There's something to that. When something like that happens, there's an absence of emotion. They don't run around crying that they were oppressed or anything. There's just this absence of emotion. It's a different thing. And he shouldn't have stopped there to criticize him in a good way. He should have pointed out that we were a country that wasn't out to hurt anybody, and that Japan was certainly this ruthless dictatorial culture, and how they sucker punched the United States. And then he should have continued. He should have talked about how the United States got itself together, and the very good part of our nature rose to the top. Our guys went and joined the military. Our gals put the children in daycare centers and went to the factories. They started building things that they hadn't a clue and never built before. In the end, they pushed guys like Admiral Nimitz to the top, as opposed to, well, they pushed guys like Admiral Nimitz to the top, and they pushed that scientist Oppenheimer to the top. And in the end, they flew over Japan and blew up one of their cities. And again, Japan was so arrogant, they decided they wouldn't surrender because it must be a hoax. Nobody would surrender. Nobody would ask them to surrender like that. They wouldn't. Had to go back and blow up another city, and the United States did. There was none of this apologizing. They didn't fall for this, you don't want to hurt their civilians, so let them win stuff. They treated a fellow as an equal, which is something so desperately needed around here. He should have given that speech, and he should have pointed out the different attitude. You came over a few years ago and sucker punches blew us, killed so many people, and now look at you. You go glow in the dark for a few years there, bub. There were people on their knees giving thanks to God for winning that war. It shouldn't have even stopped it there. If Japan had won, they would have massacred us, and we could have gone into Japan and committed genocide, but they didn't. Instead, they tried to, rehabilitate Japan, and they should have been far more aggressive about it. It takes a minimum of 3 years to undo something like that. It takes a minimum of 3 generations to undo something like that. They should have gone in, made them adopt the American dollar, adopt the family unit. They should have made them go through some training to be normal and well-adjusted. And then the Japanese guy would have been first his own man, and he would have went to work at the factory and provided for a wife. Those gals never should have started working in the factory. A man's working life and a woman's working life are completely different. To skip a bit, those commercials, they never should have seen women, young girls working at the tennis factory, whether it's Japan or China. They should have been at the shopping mall, learning Japanese Valley Girl talk and that sort of thing. Wait a minute, they would have had a 40-hour work week. They would have been able to retire at 65. They would have gotten the women and children out of the factories. Not only would their middle class start to skyrocket, but the middle class here in the United States would have grown as well. Good things would have happened over here if they had been more aggressive about trying to be nice. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just called home economics. Wait a minute. Home economics, that's the very thing that female Air Force gal, lower your voice when you say that and act tough, and those university professors, and you can just name it. That's what they threw out. We had a revolution in this country, and that's what they threw out. Perhaps that's why Pearl Harbor is so important for us. Somebody better step up and do something. Well, let's end this on a positive note. You're a young ROTC student at that university. The last thing we need is manly women and womanly men. If you're listening to this, what we need is a college of home economics. We need that young girl to go back to being a home economics professor and start being bossy again. How do you get people out of poverty? If all they have to do is start walking the 1 mile north from the university to Grant Road here, and they'll find out in a big hurry what poverty is. Pick a house that was from the 1950s and start telling yourself how much food, how much money, how much do you need to get everybody out of poverty. Let me repeat it just so it's said. There's a 1950s American house. You go out to the side, you start with farming and mining, then above that manufacturing, then above that wholesale retail and repair, and above that retirement, education, and recreation. And there's a lattice of lawyers and judges. That's enough. And then you put parentheses around it and you ask, well, if you're the home economics gal, you're choosing between a couch and 2 recliners, and you and your husband, and all the farming, all the farms, all the material, all the manufacturing, all the advertising, whether it's delivered or you go to a beautiful shopping mall, it all depends on what you decide. It's all geared toward giving you everything you want. That's as simple and clear to the point as it gets. And that's the good guy stuff. If you're a guy, forgive me, the idea of running away to the military instead of facing violence is, well, something you have to work on. Always thought over the years that what we really needed to get things started was a course. The military is exceptionally good at that sort of thing. A 16-week, week 1, day 1, hour 1 course that teaches a fella a sense of original sin. The priest is a good guy. The pimp, people who hustle, con people are the bad guys. And your job, young man, is to take a baseball bat to the queer scoundrel and get that gal pregnant. It's very real. I'm sure you can do it. Well, that was Pearl Harbor for this year. Just remember, you're the next generation of the young and big and strong. And all of us will end up counting on you.